Good evening. Wherever you are tonight, London, Lagos, New York, or Ouagadougou, take a quiet breath, because what follows is not just a report from Africa. It is a story about courage, about the heartbeat of a nation that refused to die in silence. In the eastern plains of Burkina Faso, there lies a road called Bogenmani, 90 kilometers of cracked dust and red stone that once carried trade, food, and laughter until war took it all away. For years, that road became a curse. A place whispered about in fear, where convoys vanished and silence replaced their names. Locals called it the Road of Ghosts. Soldiers called it the Road of No Return. But on the morning of October 12th, 2025, that silence was broken by the engines of men who refused to let fear define their homeland. The 19th Rapid Intervention Battalion, BIR-19, began their journey before sunrise. Over 100 trucks stretched like a steel serpent across the desert. Inside were supplies, food, medicine, and fuel, not for soldiers, but for civilians who had waited months for a glimpse of life. At the front of this long metallic river stood an armored truck marked by battle scars and dust. Beside it walked a man known only by his call sign, Lynx. A captain without rank obsession, without distance from his men. He didn't command from a screen. He walked the same dirt, breathed the same heat, and carried the same weight of uncertainty. To his men, he was both shield and compass, silent, sharp, and impossibly calm. The mission was simple in words, but deadly in reality. Reclaim the road, secure the corridor, and prove that Burkina Faso could move again. It was a mission inspired by one man's vision, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the country's young leader who believed that roads were more than asphalt. To him, they were arteries. If the arteries were open, the nation could live, and if they were cut, the nation would bleed to death. His doctrine was called security by corridor, a strategy that turned highways into lifelines. BIR-19 carried that philosophy not as an order, but as faith. As dawn spilled across the plains, engines hummed like prayer drums. Dust coiled in the air, painting the horizon red. The soldiers moved in formation, their silence heavier than gunfire. Every mile was a question. Every shadow could hide a bomb. 10 kilometers in, they found the first answer, a small pile of stones placed deliberately at a bend. To an untrained eye, nothing unusual. But to soldiers who had walked these roads before, it was the whisper of death. The convoy halted. 2 engineers crawled forward with detectors, sweat tracing their faces. Minutes stretched into hours until the faint beep of metal broke the air. Beneath the soil, a bomb wired to a pressure plate. One wrong step, and the road would claim more ghosts. "Drone, disarm," Lynx ordered. A small ground drone rolled forward, its mechanical whine cutting through the stillness. Seconds later, a controlled explosion. Smoke, dust, silence. The convoy moved again. 5 times that day, they found traps hidden in the earth. 5 times, they disarmed them. Each detonation was not just a technical victory, it was a psychological one. The enemy was still there, unseen, waiting. But BIR-19 refused to stop. Inside the trucks, soldiers sat in silence, gripping their rifles. Some prayed. Others stared into the horizon, where the heat shimmered like glass. There was no music, no laughter, no distraction, only focus and the sound of tires grinding against gravel. "The road is alive," one mechanic whispered. "You can feel it watching." Hours later, the convoy reached a curve where an abandoned civilian truck sat stranded, its engine dead, its windows shattered. A family stood beside it, a father, mother, and 2 children waving a white cloth, too afraid to move, too desperate to stay. Without hesitation, Lynx ordered a halt. He stepped down, dust rising around his boots, and approached the family alone. "Tow it," he said quietly. "No one gets left behind on this road." Against standard protocol, soldiers hooked cables to the broken truck and pulled it back into the convoy's protection. For 2 kilometers, they moved together, soldiers and civilians, until the family was safe. For that moment, The line between military and humanity disappeared. By midday, the heat became unbearable. Engines strained and the horizon wavered under waves of rising heat. Then, through the radio came a whisper, "Movement ahead." The convoy froze. Rifles lifted, eyes narrowed, two silhouettes appeared near the ridge, not insurgents, villagers, old men carrying water. They approached cautiously, trembling, then spoke. The road ahead was clear. The insurgents had fled days before, afraid of the soldiers they now called the armored ghosts. As the sun fell, the convoy stopped near an old dry riverbed. Night in the desert is not peace, it is tension wrapped in silence. Engines died. Headlights dimmed. The men formed a perimeter, their rifles pointed toward the unknown. Lynx walked the line, checking sentries. One young soldier trembled, his hands too tight on his weapon. Lynx stopped beside him and whispered, "Breathe slow. Fear is loud. The enemy listens." The private nodded, and for a moment the night breathed again, but not for long. Hours later, faint lights appeared beyond the hills, not stars, not campfires, but movement. The radio crackled. Unknown chatter. Lynx leaned over the comms. "Contact drone team, we have company." A small drone rose silently, its thermal vision cutting through the darkness. What it saw sent a ripple through every soldier's spine, a dozen armed figures advancing fast. "Positions," Lynx ordered, voice steady. The camp moved as one. Machine guns rotated. Snipers steadied their scopes. And then fire. The hills erupted. Tracers cut through the dark like red lightning. Explosions tore through silence. For 15 minutes, the night became a storm. But this battalion didn't panic. They calculated. They fought with precision. Every move practiced, every shot measured. Lynx moved between trucks, shouting coordinates. When a grenade landed near a fuel truck, he sprinted through debris, dragging a wounded soldier to safety before the explosion swallowed the air in smoke and flame. "Left flank, 2 on the ridge, keep your spacing," his voice commanded. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence returned heavy and strange. The radio came alive one by one. "Alpha clear. Bravo clear. No casualties." Relief spread quietly, almost reverently. They had survived the night. At dawn, the convoy rolled again. Dust covered their uniforms, but their eyes carried fire. As they approached the first villages near Mani, word spread ahead like wind. The soldiers weren't invaders, they were liberators. Children ran barefoot along the roadside, waving pieces of cloth like flags. Women carried bowls of water, offering them to the soldiers as they passed. Old men stood silently, tears carving lines through dust. "The road lives again," someone whispered. Lynx ordered a halt near a small settlement. An old man stood beside a broken well. Without a word, 2 engineers stepped forward, tools in hand. Within an hour, the well was fixed. Cold water burst upward, sparkling under the sunday. The villagers cheered. A small boy approached Lynx, holding a wooden toy truck. "Are you the man who brought the road back?" he asked. Lynx smiled, kneeling to meet his eyes. "No," he said softly. "We just made sure it stays open." That day, something changed. The convoy wasn't just delivering supplies, it was delivering dignity. Markets reopened. Radios crackled with music for the first time in years. The hum of engines replaced the echo of gunfire. News of the convoy spread faster than the trucks themselves across villages, across provinces, across borders. In the capital, Ouagadougou, this story reached the desk of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The mission had worked. The doctrine was real. Roads could rebuild nations. "If people can move," Traoré once said, "then a country can breathe." Soon, the story of Bogan-Mani reached beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali, Niger, and Chad, defense ministries called it a model for Africa's self-reliance. Even in Washington, analysts who once doubted the young captain's defiance of foreign aid began to reevaluate. A retired U.S. colonel wrote in an op-ed, "Control the road, control the destiny." Veterans from Iraq to Vietnam watched the footage and nodded silently. They understood what they saw, the kind of courage that fights not to conquer, but to reconnect. In 1 week, over 60,000 civilians regained access to food, medicine, and water. The convoy had done more than deliver supplies. It had reopened the nation's veins. For the first time in years, people could travel without fear. The road that was once a scar became a lifeline. In the markets, they began to sell new posters with a slogan taken from an old teacher's words, "The state came back on wheels." That phrase became history. But for Captain Lynx and his men, there were no medals, no parades, only silence. They returned to base as quietly as they had left it. Before dismissing his soldiers, Lynx said one thing: "A road is not truly free until those who walk it stop looking over their shoulders." Weeks later, new convoys began to form west toward Jibo, north toward Dori, following the same creed: train, move, reclaim, repeat. Every new road became a heartbeat. Every new village, a breath returning. And though peace remained fragile, the people moved forward. Traoré spoke to his nation soon after. "The danger may return, the enemy may change, but what we build today, courage, unity, dignity, must never be lost again." His words were not about war. They were about memory. Tonight, the Bogan-Mani Road is alive. Where there were craters, there are markets. Where there was silence, there is song. Yet the earth remembers. It remembers the men who drove into death to bring life. The ones who proved that sovereignty isn't gifted, it's earned. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another road lies broken, waiting for footsteps brave enough to cross it. They walked through fire, not for glory, but for freedom. They showed the world that courage is not the absence of fear. It is walking forward while fear walks beside you. Burkina Faso rose that day, not as a victim, but as a teacher. Because sometimes the roads that break a nation are the same roads that make it whole again. So wherever you're watching from Paris, Accra, New York, or Nairobi, remember this: the world doesn't change in boardrooms or speeches. It changes when ordinary men take impossible roads and refuse to turn back. And the story of the Bogan-Mani convoy is proof that Africa's awakening has already begun. Stay with us, because somewhere in the dust, another engine is starting, and the next road will test not just courage, but destiny itself.